Dr. Honias, we have a good question here about the incarnation of Jesus Christ and the dwelling of the divinity in Jesus Christ, the human being. So the question is, can we consider the incarnation is the same like the indwelling of the divine nature in the body of Jesus Christ, or the same are one? Did you get the question? So incarnation is equal to the fullness of divinity in the flesh of Jesus Christ. Your mind.
Well, when we talk about the incarnation, we need to be clear that in the incarnation, it is God who takes upon flesh and blood so that God can actually die. See, God by his nature, his attribute is eternal. He is life. He cannot die. It's impossible for him to die. So when we understand the incarnation, it is God becoming flesh and blood that can die, all because of sin. And so we're not talking merely the idea of just taking upon a clothing. Like, for instance, that if I put on a jacket, then I put on a jacket, and the jacket has no real connection to me, so that I can just take the jacket, put it on, or take the jacket off. Then I can take the jacket, put it on, then I can take the jacket off. Like any article of clothing, one day I could wear a red jacket, the next day I could wear a blue jacket, and I could change into a purple jacket, and then the day after that I can decide to have no jacket at all. So when we understand the incarnation, it's not merely this kind of artificial way that God just took upon a costume and dressed up just to look like a man, that it was just something that he was pretending to be. But rather in the incarnation, what is unique is it's eternal God himself takes upon flesh and blood. He comes into his creation, and he subjects himself in this creation to the order of things here. So that you have eternal God who then subjects himself to the high priest. So you don't have God just in a mask, just pretending to be a man in front of the high priest. You have God who becomes man in front of the high priest and then humbles himself and submits himself to the decisions and the judgments of the high priest. That God himself is instituted in place to keep his gifts given to the people, to teach his people his word, to bestow his holiness upon his people through the sacrifices of the Old Testament, and of course the sacraments of the New Testament. But see, so what happens is it's not just a plaything, a pretend that he just merely clothes or dresses up in a costume. It's not like he went before Pontius Pilate and just pretended to be somebody who stands before a earthly ruler. You have the king of the universe who stands before an earthly ruler and subjects himself, fully and completely humbling himself, presenting himself in weakness to the people. So that you understand that the incarnation itself shows to us that God himself took upon flesh and blood, actually truly entered into this fallen creation, so that God himself alone could redeem fallen creation. That God himself alone could bring us out of fallen creation. So that when Jesus ascends into heaven, it's not like the Son of God dressed himself up in the costume of Jesus of Nazareth, and he just indwelt him like the eternal Logos filled him up like as if he was just some kind of a box or a container. And then in the ascension, the eternal Logos just undressed himself and took the costume off of Jesus of Nazareth and just hung it up in a closet. Instead, it's the Son of God actually takes upon flesh and blood. So that in the ascension itself, you have true man sitting on the divine throne. You have eternal God and true man together. And so this gives to us this wonderful, wonderful words of comfort, that we who are flesh and blood, for the sake of Jesus, are able to stand in the presence of a holy God. And so it's not just merely this indwelling or filling of God. See, in us who are believers, as those who have been redeemed, been brought out of darkness into light, who have been baptized into Christ, we have the indwelling Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit of God actually dwells in us bodily, in our human figures. And so it's not that Jesus was just merely a man just like us, and just like us, Jesus had the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. That's not the case at all. You have Jesus who is eternal God. And that's why we know that Jesus was in the beginning with the Father and the Spirit creating things. He was the Word who was there in the beginning. He was the one who is the source of life. And so the incarnation is not merely just the indwelling of God, for all believers have the indwelling of God. The indwelling of the Holy Spirit is what the believer has, but that does not make us true God. It's God who takes up his residence in us, testifying to our own spirit, recreating us, renewing us, regenerating us, making us and forming us into the image of the Son.